you so much. Mr. Mayor, if I may, I brought you a shirt on behalf of Philip Sheldon, myself, and his wife. And I'd like to give you the shirt and hat. And I believe the shirt is a large. If it doesn't work, I can get you an extra large. But I just would love to give you that. Any chance at all that we can get a picture real quick with it? Because I've gotten every mayor in every city so far. Could somebody use my camera? It's okay?
Okay, thank you for that, Dan. That's
Thank
very
you.
generous of you. Any questions by any of the councillors? Councillor McCall.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Is there any chance that we can put this on our website? This is an important issue that
Yeah, I'm sure we can.
people.
Yeah, this is important. And I happen to know, I don't know if it fits in your plans or not, but I happen to know a charity auctioneer who would probably help you out here.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Makes all sorts of monies for different organizations.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'll speak with you after about who that is. So.
For sure. Thank you so much. Just to let you know, and one last thing, this gala is directed toward first responders. That's Philip's goal, is to help first responders. So I just want you all to make sure that you would know that.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you so much.
No questions. So get a motion to move both these delegations, please. Councillor McClellan, seconder, Councillor Gilmore, all in favor? Those are received. And I need my glasses. Okay, thank you. Moving on to the mayor's announcements. Thank you to all who attended the ceremony for the unveiling of the new Dayball Lane sign last week. It was an amazing turnout. We probably had 70, 80 people there, and it was a great indicator of our community spirit here in Wainfleet. I received a message of thanks from the board of the Niagara Health Foundation for our $5,000 grant, which was for medical imaging equipment in local hospitals serving our community. The annual memorial service at Zion Cemetery is this coming Sunday at 2 p.m. Please bring your lawn chairs. I will say a few words, and our firefighters will be laying wreaths. In the event of rain, the service will be held at the Winger Church of Christ. Excuse me. The next NPCA board meeting is Wednesday, June 19th, and that'll be my last meeting as a member of that board. Regional Council will meet next on Thursday, June 20th, and we anticipate Councillor Krillin will be appointed to the NPCA board at that meeting. The Farmers Market will be moving to the pavilion behind the arena starting Thursday, June the 20th, and will continue Thursdays throughout. I will be bringing greetings to the Maple Lawn Cemetery Memorial Service held on Sunday, June 23rd at 2 p.m. The next regular Police Service Board meeting is June 27th at NRPS headquarters, and our next regular meeting of the council will be held Tuesday, July the 9th. Okay, we look for adoption of the minutes. Any questions on the minutes? Any discussion on minutes? Okay, seeing none, if there's no objections, the minutes are adopted. Okay, we'll move on to the admin staff reports. ASR 015-2019. Is there any discussion on that? Alcott? Oh, sorry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's my report. So
Right.
ASR 15, 16, and 17, I'll just do a high-level summary of kind of all three of them together because they all relate to the same topic. So under the Municipal Act, we're allowed to refund, cancel, or reduce taxes due to a change event that may occur. In the cases of the three reports that are in front of you, the first property is the property that the township purchased for the new fire station. Obviously, now that it's become a township property, it's tax exempt, and so we're writing off the taxes that have been accrued to date on that property. And the other two relate to two properties where fires destroyed the buildings, and so the values related to those properties has reduced in MPAC's estimation because of those events. So this is for council to reduce the taxes of the three properties.
Okay, thank you. Is there any discussion or questions by council? Seeing none, I have a mover. Councillor Gilmore, seconder. Councillor McClellan, all in favor? Opposed? None, that's carried. Okay, the next staff report is the asset management policy, and Mr. Treasurer, I think you wanted to speak to that.
Or effective July 1st, 2019, adopt strategic asset management policies. So this is basically the government wanting us to have a policy in place to guide our asset management plans and how we're going to address our infrastructure needs going forward. So in order to be compliant with the deadline of July 1st, before you is the proposed policy with respect to asset management. The one key thing that I wanted to highlight for council is Section 17 of the policy speaks to council's responsibilities with respect to asset management. So the first thing is adopting the asset management policy, which also will require an update every 5 years. The next two are to ensure or implement the asset management plan as part of the annual budget process. So when we're presenting our capital budget, this is where that comes into play. So one of the things you'll want to consider is how do these proposed projects fit into our asset management plan and our future outlook for our infrastructure. Obviously, the next item is to support our efforts to implement our asset management plan and strategy. And the final thing is you're required to approve the township's asset management plan. Again, there are deadlines or timeline outlined in the Ontario regulation with respect to the asset management plan. The next sort of milestone is July 1st, 2021, where our core assets have to be planned for. So this is the first step of several, but an important one to kind of establish how we're going to maintain our assets going forward.
Okay, thank you. Questions, discussions on that? Councillor Cridlin?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's good to be moving forward on this plan, and I think there's some funding for smaller communities to help us then with this next chunk. So we've achieved this first milestone, but it sounds like there's a lot of work ahead still for a small community.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Cridlin. Yes, that's correct. It's a big undertaking for any municipality. Obviously, we have less resources here, being smaller, to kind of dedicate to asset management solely. But we were able to get $50,000 grant from FCM last year to help draft the policy and also start us moving towards a new, more robust asset management plan. FCM did announce in May another $60 million in funding over the next 5 years for asset management. So the hope is that we'll be successful again, kind of as we implement the next few phases of the plan.
Okay, any other discussion, questions? Okay, seeing none, a mover and a seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Gilmore, second Councillor McCollum. All in favor? And that report is received. Okay, one more by the treasurer. That is number 19.
So this is an annual report that we're required to do as part of the Building Code Act. Essentially, we have to summarize the building permit fees and septic fees for the year, as well as the costs associated with administering the building code with respect to this. In terms of the outcome of 2018, there is a surplus of funds created through the building department last year due to the higher than normal volume of activity, and that increase will raise our reserve balance from $85,000 to $118,000. These funds have to go into a specific reserve for building and can only be used for building activities. So that's administering the administration of the building department as well as enforcing the code. So that's the requirement of the funds. Basically, you're allowed to have a reserve so that during slow periods, you can still cover your costs.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on that? Okay, seeing none, recommendation that ASR 19-2019 be received for information. Mover on that, Councillor Quidlin, seconder, please. Councillor Van Vliet, all in favor, and that is carried. Okay, moving on to admin staff report 20-2019. And anything to speak to there, Mr. Treasurer?
Essentially, this is another requirement under an Ontario Regulation 284. Basically, as part of our budget, we budget on a cash basis, so we don't budget for some items that we're then required to report on as part of our annual financial statements presented under public accounting standards. So the two main ones for the Township of Wainfleet are amortization or depreciation of capital assets as well as employee future benefits. So the requirement is any municipality that doesn't budget for those as part of their budget is just required to outline what those costs are to council so that they're fully aware. In this case, it's projected at roughly $1.2 million for the township.
Okay, thank you. And discussion, questions? Okay, seeing none, recommendation that ASR 20-2019 be received and that council approve and adopt this report to meet the requirements of the Ontario Regulation 284-09 with respect to expenses that have been excluded from the 2019 budget. Mover on that, please. Councillor Quaylen, seconder. Councillor McClellan, all in favor, and that is carried. And I think that's just for in case the public doesn't know, our treasurer, Adam Cross, has taken another job in another location. And it's a promotion per se, so congratulations on that. This is his last council meeting here today, and that was his last report right there. So I want to thank you for the 3 years of service here in Wainfleet, and I know you've really taken us and pointed us in the right direction fiscally and as a whole township. So thank you very much. Okay, now we're going to move on to the fire chief's report. That is FSR 007-2019. And would you like to speak to that, please, Chief?
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. The purpose of this report is to inform Council the status of the joint facility for fire and EMS. Following the budget approval and the lands purchased, staff have been working towards engaging our allied partners to see if there was any interest in a shared facility. Presentations were made both to Niagara Regional Police and Niagara Region EMS. At the May 30th Police Service Board meeting, the Police Services Board did decline any interest in a shared facility. However, Niagara Region EMS is still interested, and staff are working with the EMS in developing a draft plan that meets their needs, not only for the continuation of the community response unit, but also building for any future land ambulance capacity whereby a transport unit in the future may be added. As part of the process, multiple approvals will need to be required, and with the lands being on Highway 3, the MTO has required a traffic impact study, with which staff are currently in the process of having completed. Also, as part of the engineering for both the foundation and the septic, a survey at topographic has been completed, and a geological study will need to be done. And also the lands, one piece is currently zoned commercial, the other one residential. So both of those pieces will need to be rezoned and have an official plan amendment done, with which planning staff will be coming forward in the future to have both of those items addressed. Now, with regards to the actual lands itself, there is 2 buildings on the property now. One is a 2-story poultry barn, and the other is a single detached dwelling. Of which the detached dwelling will need to be declared surplus, whether it be demolished or sold. How that's sold, it'll have to be dealt with privately and moved off site if council so chooses. If not, then we can just simply demolish it as it lays. That's one of the recommendations or one of the requests is that council provide staff direction on how to proceed with the dwelling unit. The second piece of that is that the chicken barn or the poultry barn will also need to be reduced in size, so that way the facility will fit, the fire station facility will fit on the lands, which was part of the capital budget for 2019. And so staff are also looking for direction that we move ahead with the reduction of that building.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions, discussion with the fire chief? Councillor McClellan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Fire Chief Morgan. Is what you're gonna spend to remodel that barn worth, we're still gonna end up with an ugly old barn in a brand-new building. You know, it's, I hate to say the chicken and the egg, but do we really want an old barn there that, well, if we're building a hall, why don't we just make a storage with it so it's all one? Or it's similar in appearance?
If I may, through you, Mr. Mayor. So with the building that's there now, the intent is to reduce it by 1/3, reuse the steel, give it a coat of paint, keep it as is. Both as a shared, I believe a training facility was something that was discussed as part of the operational review that was conducted in 2015. So part of that building would be repurposed for that, as well as central storage for all the stations. Certainly we could entertain making the fire station bigger, but at increased construction costs, I find it pretty, I can't see if it would be fiscally responsible to build a facility when there's one there that could just be partially demolished. It's something that staff could look into if council directs.
And I think part of the intended use of that is cutting cars apart, and so it's going to be kind of a rough use area as well. So you don't want to put a dent in a new building there. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Oh, Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I heard the chief say he wanted some direction on possibly what we should do with the house.
Yes, that's correct.
So, I mean, depending on your timeline, I think it's reasonably easy to move that house because, based on the design of it. And I think that you should, personally, I think that you should try to sell it and move it out of there before we just knock it over. So I don't know if you want a motion to that effect. If so, then I would move that you proceed with the intent of selling it, within whatever timeline fits within the plans that we're currently working under.
Okay, so Councillor Gilmore, you made a motion to proceed with trying to sell that building or dispose of it in any other way that can gain us some funds. That's your motion. Seconder on that, please. Councillor McClellan. All in favor on that motion? And that is carried. Okay, and further that recommendations FSR 007-2019 be received for information, and that staff be directed to commence the necessary procedures for zoning bylaw and official plan amendments on the subject lands. Any discussion on that? Councillor Cridlin?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. To the chief, again, for me, it's just clarification about what the necessary procedures are. I think you've named them here, but I just, from your discussion, it sounds like a couple items have been already completed. So the other items that we're approving is the design for the site plan and the geological study and the traffic impact study. Is that what we're approving in that other little bundle?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct, unless I'm missing anything, and if that's the case, I'd have planning staff follow up with that one.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Cridlin. So that's correct. We had a pre-consultation meeting to kind of outline the studies, and so traffic impact and the geological and the concept or design of how the lands are going to be used are the primary things to get the zoning bylaw and official plan amendment going.
Sorry, and just one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And so, because we don't yet know the size, we've now determined that the one party's out, but we haven't firmed up what the square footage. All the work we're about to do is regardless of the size of the footprint that we're putting on there, right, at this stage? Can I clarify that as well?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct.
Thank you.
Okay, no, and one more question, Councillor, or more questions, Councillor McClellan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, do we have a rough idea what these studies are going to cost us in the rezoning? Just so we can kind of keep a running tab of what this is all.
Yeah, I look to the fire chief for that information, please.
So I've actually been working with the operations manager. He has, with his contacts, worked with these firms before. So he has collected the quotes for those studies to be conducted. And then any zoning and amendments, that would all flow through the Planning Act. So that's the planner to determine those fees.
Mr. Nan, would you care to speak to that, please?
Your worship, to all members of council, I'm still finalizing quotes, and we did get a lead today that I'm going to be following up tomorrow because there's another business that's going through that will be proceeding with a traffic impact study on number 3 as well, in the same location. So I'll be following up with them tomorrow to try and piggyback on a study so we could try and save some money. But the geological and the traffic impact study should be just over $10,000, and then whatever fees are going to be required for the zoning.
Okay, Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one more question for the planner. That property is split with the hamlet boundary. What's the intention as far as tidying all that up?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gilmore. So we can't adjust the limits or the boundaries of the hamlet. So currently, in terms of what the fire department needs, we had some assistance from the Niagara region urban design team to kind of lay out and develop a concept. And so we're confident that we can fit all the station and all of the necessary parking and septic on the lands within the hamlet. And the lands that are outside of the hamlet, once the fire station is established, it'll be easier to go through an amendment process to use that as an institutional use or as part of the fire service. So for example, if in the future a training tower or some other need was needed for that property, once the fire station is established on the lands within the hamlet, it's a much easier planning justification to use those lands that are designated as agricultural, being just outside of the hamlet. So this was all part of a discussion that we had in pre-consultation meeting, but I think we're fairly confident that what the fire department needs will fit on the lands that are currently within the hamlet boundaries.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Cridland.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Do we have a sense of approximately when we'd know the size? I know that we've just learned about the fire, or the police changing their, but you said you're into some designs now to establish what the health area needs. Are we months away from knowing sort of the footprint, or 6 months away, just roughly?
So I'm working with Niagara Region EMS right now. They're working on telling me what their spatial needs are. The officers, the fire department officers, as well as the deputy chief and myself in operations, we're working on what the fire department needs are based on kind of a set formulation of other fire stations. Once that's put together, we'll re-engage the regional design team to kind of come up with a concept, and that will establish our gross floor plan.
And Mr. Mayor, through you, once that gross floor plan is established, we'll be coming back to this council with that information and any other details that we have at that time.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, just to summarize, our recommendation is that FSR 007-2019 be received for information, that staff be directed to sell the existing dwelling located on the township property, and that staff be directed to commence the necessary procedures for zoning bylaw and official plan amendments on the subject lands. Okay, may I have a mover for that, please? Councillor Van Vliet, seconder. Councillor McClellan. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Okay, we move on to our planning staff report, PSR 003-2019, zoning bylaw amendment. And I look to our planner if she would, anything there you would like to speak to?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to all of council. So this is an application for a property known as 53154 Wilford Road. And the zoning change is required as a condition of approval from a surplus farm dwelling application that was approved by the Committee of Adjustment in April. And so the application is proposing to rezone Part 2 from agricultural A2 to an agricultural A2-1 and 66. And those exceptions are to recognize reduced lot area of 6.2 hectares, where 40 is required, a reduced lot frontage of 83.41 meters, where 180 meters is required, and to prohibit dwellings on this parcel. And that's to ensure that the lands remain in agricultural production. We had a public meeting for this file back on May 8th in 2019. There was no public input or questions from council at that time. So my report goes into depth on the planning analysis, but my conclusion and recommendation to council is that the application be approved.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, the recommendation is that this report be received and that the application for lands described as part of Lot 31 Concession 6, Township of Wainfleet, known municipally as 53154 Wilford Road, be approved for the reasons outlined in this report, and that the application is deemed to be consistent with the provincial policy statement of 2014 and other matters of provincial interest, and that the zoning bylaw amendment attached as Appendix B be adopted. And mover for that, please. Councillor Gilmore, seconder. Councillor Van Vliet, all in favor, and that is carried. And now we look to planning staff report 004-2019. Is there anything there, Sarah, that you would like to speak to?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to all of council. So this is a property known as 12394 Lakeshore Road. And the proposed zoning amendment application is seeking to rezone the property from an institutional zone to a residential Lakeshore C10 zone. And this is to recognize the change in use from St. Teresa's Church to a residential use. There's also a site-specific regulation being requested to recognize the existing height. Maximum under the bylaws 9 meters, and this application is requesting the 9.6. So we had a public meeting regarding this file back in January 22nd. At that time, there was no public input or questions from council. And in my report, I go into depth on the planning analysis, and I have come to the conclusion and recommendation that council approve the application.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, a recommendation that this report be received. That application for lands described as concession 1 part of lot 23, plan 737, lots 59 to 64, part lot 65, Township of Wainfleet, known municipally as 12394 Lakeshore Road, be approved for reasons outlined in this report, and that the application is deemed to be consistent with the provincial policy statement, and that the zoning bylaw amendment attached as Appendix B be adopted. Have a mover for that, please. Councillor McClellan, seconder. Councillor Cridlin, all in favor, and that is carried. Okay, we'll move on to Public Works 005-2019. And is there anything there you would like to speak to, Richard?
Through your worship to all members of council, this section of road is Burkett Road, to be surface treated. We split the actual contract in our capital budgets because it's 2 separate types of construction that was being taken place. So we've decided to separate the contracts, and this one is for Burkett Road surface treatment. And as you can see, we put out a tender as per our township policies, and we received 2 bidders. And the lowest bidder is Norjon Contracting for $99,775. And the portion of our budget that was placed towards Burkett Road of $122,000 will be applied towards this contract.
Okay, thank you very much. So way under budget. Excellent. Any questions? Go ahead.
Through your worship, it may seem we're under budget, but we've had to do substantial base repairs of our own. In-house staff will be using up a lot of that excess funding from that budget line item as well.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, recommendation that this report be received, and that council authorize the manager of operations to award the 2019 surface treatment tender to Norjon Contracting and Paving. A mover is Councillor Cridlin, seconded by Councillor Gilmore. All in favor, and that is carried. Okay, the next Public Works report 006-2019, Energy Conservation and Demand Management Plan. Do you wish to speak to that, or does it stand on its own?
Through your worship, just to bring council up to speed, this will be the second energy conservation demand management plan submitted by the Township of Wainfleet. Our first one was submitted in 2014 under the original Ontario regulation under the Green Energy Act. The Green Energy Act has since been repealed, and now it's been placed under the Electricity Act. But the stipulations were that we resubmit a new plan as of July 1st, similar to some of the regulations that Adam has to do. There's a new plan that has to be submitted by July 1st for the next 5-year portion. So staff has reviewed our electricity usage, our gas usage, etc. And we've created a new energy management plan, which I've attached for submission to council.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, recommendation this report be received and that council endorse the Township of Wainfleet Energy Conservation and Demand Management Plan. I have a mover for that, please. Councillor Van Vliet, seconded. Councillor McClellan, all in favor? And that is carried. Okay, and the last Public Works staff report is 007-2019, and I'm guessing our operations officer would like to speak to that one as well.
Through your worship to all members of council. Gents Road, this brings up Gents Road Bridge again. We've been keeping an eye on it because of the status it's been in. During the spring, some of the rains, etc. we've noticed some differences on it. So it showed us some concerns, so we actually brought the bridge inspection engineers back. And they did determine that there is a considerable deterioration on the concrete in some areas. So they've recommended two things. One of the things to council is to reduce the weight of that bridge to 10-ton maximum. That's not per axle, that's 10-ton maximum. As well as to monitor it on a yearly basis. Right now, we perform bridge inspections biannually as per a regulation. But the recommendation is, again, that we will keep monitoring it on a yearly basis just so we can keep track of what's going on.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor McClellan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Nand, you were going to get us a report or a price on a steel bridge replacement. Has that ever happened?
Through your worship, I haven't received the final quote from them yet. They did do some correspondence back to me, and he apologizes for not sending the actual numbers, but he expects they should be here in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. The next question. Again, at 10-ton total weight, these farm tractors and wagons that are going across, they weigh more than 10-ton. We got to do something serious here before somebody falls through this. Yeah. We talked about closing it at budget. Has anybody talked to the neighbors about that? We were going to ask that question.
Through your worship, in light of this new report from the engineers, that's one of the discussions we've had as staff, was to actually approach all the users on Gents Road, including all the neighbors. In light of that, I also did receive a complaint yesterday and had to make another trip out to Gents Road Bridge. And it appears that our guide rail that was there has actually been hit by one of the farm tractors. So I'm looking at some potential repairs to the guide rail now. So right now we've got it coned off, let's put it that way, for the time being, just to make it safe and indicating the damage. But that's one of the things we're going to be reviewing, is discussing with the neighbors and the options. But for liability's sake, it's prudent for the township to, follow what the engineer recommendations are and to try and limit the weight limits to the 10-ton. It's either that or we end up closing the road. But right now, it's still functional in their opinion that they could still be used for vehicles less than 10-ton.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that it's time that we schedule a public meeting in the fall, September, October, and start the process of talking about closing this before we do have a problem. Because you can put those signs up and everybody knows that people don't, they don't listen to signs. And something's going to happen, and we might as well get it on the table and decide what we're going to do and see what the appetite is for that, because I don't think we have the appetite to replace that bridge. That's just how I feel about it. But we need to get the ball rolling on a public meeting.
Okay, I'll look to Richard again to speak to that, please.
Your worship, we can start engaging the landowners and the users that live on that road now, just to get some sense of their opinion up front, just to let them know that we are reducing the weight limit to begin with. And we will be talking to the local farmers that are in that area to advise them as well. But if council would like to have a public meeting scheduled sometime in the fall,
And just to build on that, Mr. Mayor, through you, as Richard indicated, he is securing information and pricing information about a potential replacement style. And perhaps prior to like jumping into the public meeting, if we come back with that information once it becomes available, that will give you at least a sort of benchmark or reference point that you can use before moving to the next step of determining whether it's potential close or potential repair or replacement. But again, all of that scheduled to occur prior to the fall so that you have the information moving forward.
Okay, Councillor McClellan, you have another question?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Richard, what is the possibility of putting a couple of signs up at either end that it's not a through road for trucks over 10 ton? With GPS and people get lost and somebody's going to get in there, he pulls in with a tractor trailer or a triaxle dump truck, and he finds out when he gets there, there's no place to turn around. It's a narrow road. He's going to try and back out. Like, we all know what's going to happen. The guy's going to drive across the bridge and either do more damage or go through it. It should be signed at each end. If
through your worship, I did mention in the report that we'll be putting up signage. It's not strictly just for the 10-ton for the bridge. We will be putting it at both ends of that road, including a section off the concession where they enter off of Regional 24. We will be putting signs up at both ends as well, just to signify that it is a 10-ton bridge up ahead.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, seeing none. So I make a recommendation that this report be received and that council direct staff to bring back the necessary bylaw to reduce the weight restriction on Gents Road Bridge to 10 tons, that appropriate signage be placed at both ends of the road, and that council at this time approve an annual inspection performed on Gents Road Bridge to monitor it, and that we have a public meeting scheduled for in September or October to assess where we need to go on this bridge. So it seems to be deteriorating faster than we thought it was going to. So anything, any changes to that motion or recommendations? Councillor Cridlin?
And that just acknowledges the time that we needed to bring back that other report. Thank you.
Councillor McClellan.
through you, Mr. Mayor, could we get this, maybe have Mr. Nand push this company so that we get an answer for our next meeting, so we have some time to think about this? Even if he's at half the price, it's still a lot of money to, I don't know that we can afford to do it. So we should make up our mind so that before Christmas and the frost gets into more of these cracks and these things start falling apart on us, we can make a decision and decide what we're going to do.
Okay, can we ask that of you, Mr. Nen? Thank you for that. Yeah, it's imperative. It is deteriorating faster than we thought it would, and we certainly don't want to be in a position of liability should a vehicle go through and somebody's injured or worse. So let's move forward on this as quickly as we can, and public meeting in the fall, and direct staff to we get that set up. Okay, so can I have a mover for this? Councillor McClellan, seconder. Councillor Gilmore, all in favor? And that is carried. Okay, we're moving on to correspondence. And draw your attention to C-126, 2019. Is there any discussion on that? Any questions on that? It's ash trees in the town of Fort Erie in the region of Niagara, a request from Fort Erie to the region, and no discussion. Councillor Cridlin?
Thank you, Mayor. I would just move that we receive that for information only.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Van Vliet? Any discussion? Okay, seeing none. All in favor? Okay, and that is carried. Moving on to C-143, 2019, received from the City of Thorold regarding opposition to Bill 108, request for support of their resolution. Any discussion on that? I'll ask the CAO to speak to it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just a note that we did receive notice today that Bill 108 has been passed. It has received royal assent. There were some amendments to it, but it is now law. So just pass that information along.
Okay, so is there an appetite to continue supporting this, Councillor Gilmore?
No, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I would move that we receive it for information.
Okay, we have a seconder for that, Councillor Cridland. All in favor? And that is carried. Okay, we move on to our bylaws. Any discussion on those bylaws? There's quite a number here from A, B, all the way down to M. I'm wondering if there's nothing there of interest that we need to discuss that we could move them in block, Council or CAO.
Mr. Mayor, through you, just a note regarding a bulk of the sort of amending bylaws associated with the administrative monetary penalty system. Members will recall that this was an item that was considered at the May 28th meeting of council, where you reviewed a report from the bylaw enforcement officer, report number 11-2019, where he explained the process of setting up short form wording, if you will, which permits or provides for the existing bylaws to be enforced, if you will, through a new provincially authorized administrative monetary penalty system. During the discussion at that meeting, there was one inquiry made by a member of council regarding an amendment or a potential amendment to the township's nuisance bylaw, which currently has a clause relating to persons attempting to tip over mailboxes, tipping over garbage cans, tipping over various sort of public utility type items that might exist in the community. And the request from the member was to consider adding portable washrooms or porta potties to that list of items. So the amending bylaw before you this evening, bylaw number 042-219, in addition to the monetary penalties that were originally recommended by the bylaw officer, also has been recommends an amendment to include porta potties, portable washrooms, if you will, to that list of other like items. So just wanted to bring that to members' attention as you consider the bylaws this evening.
Councillor McClellan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I remember when we were going through this, all of our bylaws are complaint-based, right, where we get that. if we're gonna start charging people money, we have to do this fairly and equally across the town. Just because somebody calls on one neighbor, the guy put a sea can in his yard. Anybody that's got one in their yard should get a ticket. We should not be, just because you have a neighbor that calls, or somebody drives by the street and sees it, or doesn't like any one of us. I used this before because we raised the tax rate. We never did get a report how we're gonna do that. I think we have to be fair, right? So Will, maybe you have an answer.
Look to the CAO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the bylaw enforcement officer, along with senior staff, have been working on that report. A first draft has been completed, but we were unable to finish it for presentation to tonight's meeting. And that report will be coming to the next meeting of council, which is on July 9th. So in, 3 weeks, 4 weeks from now, your next council meeting, you will have that report before you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, any other discussion on this block? Okay, if there's no other discussion on any of them, I ask that we move them in block and pass them all in one motion. I have a mover for that, please. Councillor Gilmore, seconder. Councillor Van Vliet, all in favor? And that is carried. Okay, notices of motion. Are there any notices of motion this evening? Okay, seeing none, is there any other business? Councillor Cridland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to note that I'm absent from the next regular council meeting in July. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other business? Okay, then ask for a motion to move into our closed meeting, please.
That council now move into closed session to discuss item under section 239, 2D of the Municipal Act 2001, labor relations or employee negotiations. 2 items, human resources matters. Item under section 239I of the Municipal Act 2001, a trade secret or scientific, technical, commercial, financial, or labor relations information supplied in confidence to the municipality or local board, which, if disclosed, could reasonably be expected to prejudice significantly the competitive position or interfere significantly with the contractual or other negotiations of a person, group of persons, or organization. 1 item, servicing matter. Item under section 239K of the Municipal Act 2001, a position, plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or behalf of the municipality or local board. 1 item, facility use agreement matter.
Have a mover for that, please. Councillor Gilmore, seconder. Councillor McClellan, all in favor. Thank you, and we'll move into closed session. Thank you.